In 1971, something broke in America, and most people still don't know what it was. A factory worker in Detroit could buy a house with 2 years of salary. A single income could support a family of 4, a car and a summer vacation. College cost the equivalent of a summer job. Retirement was a pension, not a prayer. That world is gone. Today, the average American family needs 2 incomes just to afford what one income bought 50 years ago. The house that cost 2 years of salary, now it takes 9. College. That summer job now requires 10 years of payments. And that pension, it died quietly in a boardroom somewhere in the 90s. This isn't a story about people being lazy. It's not about avocado toast or iPhones. This is about something much bigger, something systemic, something that was designed. The American middle class isn't disappearing by accident. It's being hollowed out by forces that most people can't even see. And the scariest part, the people who benefit from it want you to believe it's your fault. Let's go back to when it all worked. Post-World War II America was an economic miracle. Not because Americans were special, not because of some inherent superiority, but because of a very specific set of circumstances that created the most powerful wealth building engine in human history. The rest of the industrialized world was destroyed. Europe was rubble. America's factories were untouched. American manufacturing exploded. We made everything steel. Cars, electronics, textiles, and the profit stayed here. But it wasn't just about making things, it was about who got paid. Unions were strong, really strong. In 1955, 1 in 3 American workers was in a union. They negotiated, they fought, they won. Wages rose with productivity. When companies made more money, workers made more money. It was simple math. CEOs made about 20 times what their average worker made. Not 200 times, not 500 times, 20. There was inequality, sure, but there was also a deal. An unspoken contract. You work hard, you get rewarded. You stay loyal to the company stays loyal to you. You could start in the mailroom and retire as a manager. The ladder had rungs you could actually climb. Housing was affordable because supply met demand. Banks required 20% down and verified your income. Mortgages were simple, 30-year fixed rates. No tricks, no traps. You knew exactly what you were paying every month for 30 years. Education was practically free. The University of California system charged 0 tuition for state residents until 1984. Community colleges were stepping stones, not debt traps. The GI Bill sent millions to college who never could have afforded it otherwise. Society invested in its people because it understood something we've forgotten: an educated population isn't a cost, it's an asset. Healthcare was tied to employment, but employers actually provided it. Good coverage, low deductibles, prescription costs that didn't require a second mortgage. Hospitals were mostly non-profit. Medical school didn't cost $300,000. Doctors made good money, but they weren't drowning in debt before they even started. And here's the thing nobody talks about: the tax structure was completely different. In 1960, the top marginal tax rate was 91%. 91. On income over $200,000, which is about $2 million in today's money. Did that destroy the economy? No. We built the interstate highway system. We went to the moon. We funded world-class public universities. We created the infrastructure that made the next 50 years of growth possible. This was the deal. This was the American dream, and it wasn't a myth. It was policy. It was a choice. A series of choices made by government, by business, by society. Choices that created the broad-based prosperity that defined the greatest generation and the boomers who came after. But deals can be broken. And in the 1970s, the cracks started to show. The oil crisis hit. Inflation exploded. Unemployment rose. American cars couldn't compete with more efficient Japanese imports. Steel towns started to rust. The post-war boom was ending and nobody knew what came next. That's when the ideas changed. That's when a new philosophy took over. One that said the old deal was the problem. That unions were too powerful. That taxes were too high. That regulations were strangling business. That if we just unleashed the market, if we just got government out of the way, prosperity would return. They called it supply-side economics. Trickle-down re-economics. The names changed, but the theory was the same: give more to those at the top, and everyone benefits. Cut taxes on the rich. Slash regulations. Privatize everything. Let the free market work its magic. It sounded good. It sounded like freedom. And when you're standing in a gas line in 1979, when your factory is closing, When inflation is eating your savings, you're desperate for solutions. You'll listen to anyone who promises to bring back the good times. So America made a choice. We dismantled the architecture that built the middle class, and we replaced it with something else entirely. Something that looked like capitalism, but functioned more like extraction. But to understand how deep this goes, to understand why your paycheck doesn't go as far as your parents', why you're one medical emergency away from bankruptcy, why your kids might be the first generation to do worse than you did, we have to look at the hidden numbers. The ones they don't want you to see. The first number that tells you everything, from 1948 to 1973, worker productivity and wages moved together, almost perfectly. Productivity went up 25%. Wages went up 25%. Workers got paid for the value they created. Then 1973 hits and the line split. Activity keeps climbing.
Up, up, up.
But wages flat. Almost completely flat for 50 years. Since 1973, productivity has increased 77%. Wages, 12%. After you adjust for inflation, let that sink in. American workers are producing 77% more value per hour than they did in 1973. They're working harder, they're working smarter, they're using better technology, and they're getting 12% more money. Where did the other 65% go? That's not a mystery. That's not complicated economics. It went up. To executives, to shareholders, to people who already had money. CEO pay is the smoking gun. In 1965, CEOs made 20 times what their average worker made. By 1989, it was 58 times. By 2000, it was 376 times. Today, 350 times. Some CEOs make in one day what their workers make in an entire year. They'll tell you it's about talent, about market forces, about competition for leadership. But here's what they won't tell you: CEO pay has almost no correlation with company performance. Studies prove it. CEOs who drive their companies into the ground still get massive bonuses. It's not about merit, it's about power. About a class of people who sit on each other's boards and vote each other ridiculous compensation packages. But the wage theft goes deeper than CEO pay. It's in the classification games, calling workers independent contractors instead of employees. No benefits, no overtime, no protections. Uber, DoorDash, TaskRabbit. The gig economy isn't innovation, it's labor law avoidance with an app. It's in the union busting. Reagan broke the air traffic controllers in 1981. That sent a message. Suddenly, breaking strikes was acceptable. Hiring permanent replacement workers was legal. Companies spent millions on union-busting consultants. They'd rather close a factory than let workers organize. Today, union membership is 6% in the private sector. 6%. And not coincidentally, wages are stagnant and inequality is exploding. The only real leverage workers ever had was collective bargaining. Take that away, and you're negotiating alone against a corporation worth billions. Good luck, but wages are only half the equation. The other half is cost. What you have to pay just to exist. And that's where the real devastation lies. Housing. The median home price in 1970 was about $17,000. The median household income was about $9,000. A home cost twice your annual income. Today, median home price is $430,000. Median household income is $75,000. A home costs nearly 6 times your annual income, but it's worse than that. Because interest rates matter. In 1970, you might have paid 8%. Today it's 7%, same ballpark. But the price multiplier means your actual mortgage payment takes up twice as much of your income as it did for your parents. And it's not because of some natural market force. It's because housing became an investment vehicle instead of a place to live. Corporations now own hundreds of thousands of single-family homes. They're not building, they're buying. They're using algorithms to push rents higher. They're converting apartments to condos. Luxury condos nobody can afford, but that's not the point. The point is scarcity. Scarcity drives prices up. Zoning laws make it worse. Every suburb fights density. No apartments, no starter homes. Just 4-bedroom colonials starting at $600,000. NIMBYism dressed up as preserving neighborhood character. It's really about preserving property values by keeping supply low. Then there's education. In 1980, the average cost of tuition at a public 4-year university was about $1,200 a year. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $4,000 today. Want to know the actual cost? $11,000. Private universities, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year. Student loan debt is now $1.7 trillion. Trillion. With a T. It's the second largest category of household debt after mortgages. 43 million Americans are carrying student loans. The average borrower owes $37,000. But plenty owe six figures. For degrees that lead to jobs that pay $40,000 a year. And you can't escape it. Student loan debt is nearly impossible to discharge in bankruptcy. It follows you forever, garnishes your wages, takes your tax refund, delays your ability to buy a house, start a family, save for retirement. An entire generation is starting their adult lives in a hole they'll spend decades climbing out of. Why did college get so expensive? Because states stopped funding it. State funding per student has been cut by more than half since 1990. Universities had to make up the difference somehow, so they raised tuition, and they could raise tuition because student loans were easy to get, guaranteed by the government, can't be discharged. It's a perfect scam. Universities charge whatever they want. Banks make guaranteed profit. Students get crushed. Healthcare might be the cruelest part. America spends more on healthcare per capita than any nation on earth. 17% of GDP, $4.3 trillion a year. And for all that spending, we have worse outcomes than countries that spend half as much. The average family health insurance premium is $22,000 a year. $22,000. That's before deductibles, before co-pays, before the insurance company denies your claim because the doctor you saw in the emergency room while you were unconscious wasn't in network. Medical debt is the leading cause of bankruptcy in America. Even people with insurance go bankrupt from medical bills. Cancer treatment can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Insulin that costs $6 to make cells for $300. EpiPens that used to cost $100 now cost $600. Not because of manufacturing costs. Because they can. And if you lose your job, you lose your health care. In the middle of a pandemic, millions of Americans lost health insurance exactly when they needed it most. That's not a system designed for health. That's a system designed for profit. Add it up. Housing costs are up 300%. Education costs are up 250%. Healthcare costs are up 200%. Childcare costs are up 200%. But wages, up 12%. The math doesn't work, it can't work. A middle-class life on a middle-class salary is mathematically impossible now. That's not opinion, that's arithmetic. And when the math doesn't work, people break. They work multiple jobs. They skip doctor visits. They don't have kids because they can't afford them. They live with their parents into their 30s. They delay retirement into their 70s. They die younger from stress and untreated illness, and the grinding exhaustion of trying to survive in an economy that's rigged against them. This is the machinery of extraction. Take more from workers. Pay them less. Charge them more for housing, education, healthcare. Eliminate their ability to organize. Make them desperate. Make them compete with each other instead of uniting against the people taking everything. And the most diabolical part. Convince them it's their fault. Tell them they're not working hard enough. Tell them they should have learned to code. Tell them they made bad choices. Keep them blaming themselves, blaming each other, blaming immigrants or other countries or whoever, just never looking up at the people who designed this. But systems have consequences. You can only squeeze people so long before something breaks. And what's breaking isn't just bank accounts. It's the entire social fabric. The numbers tell a story of decline. But behind every number is a human life, a dream deferred, a future cancelled. Millennials are the first generation in American history expected to do worse economically than their parents. Not because they're lazy. Not because they're entitled. Because the ladder was pulled up behind the generation before them. They entered the workforce during the Great Recession. They graduated with crushing debt into an economy with no jobs. They watched housing prices double while their wages stagnated. Now they're in their 30s and 40s, and half of them have no retirement savings. None. Gen Z is watching this happen and opting out entirely. They're not buying homes, they're not having kids, they're not investing in a future they don't believe in. Birth rates are at historic lows. And it's not because of culture or values. It's because children are expensive and the math doesn't work. A middle-class life requires $250,000 per child. If you're barely surviving yourself, that's not a choice. That's a fantasy. The social consequences are everywhere. Life expectancy in America is declining. The only developed nation where that's happening. Deaths of despair, they call them. Suicides. Drug overdoses, alcoholism. People are dying from hopelessness, from the stress of economic precarity, from the realization that no matter how hard they work, they'll never get ahead. Mental health is collapsing. Anxiety and depression rates have doubled in the last decade, particularly among young people. They're inheriting a world of climate crisis, economic instability, and political dysfunction, and they're being told to just work harder, to pull themselves up by bootstraps they can't afford to buy. Trust is evaporating. Trust in institutions. Trust in government. Trust in corporations. Trust in the idea that the system works. When people stop believing the system can deliver for them, they stop playing by the rules. They look for alternatives. Sometimes that's democratic socialism. Sometimes it's authoritarian populism. Desperation doesn't care about ideology. It just wants someone to burn the whole thing down. Crime is a lagging indicator of economic distress. Not all crime, but the kind born from necessity. When people can't afford to live legally, some will find ways to live illegally. When the social contract is broken, when following the rules leads to poverty anyway, why follow them? The political system is paralyzed because it's been captured. The same forces that hollowed out the middle class now control the policy-making apparatus. Citizens united opened the floodgates. Corporations are people. Money is speech. The result: politicians serve donors, not voters. Lobbying is a trillion-dollar industry. For every one person Congress has on staff, there are 20 lobbyists walking the halls. Tax policy is written by the people it benefits. Financial regulation is written by banks. Healthcare policy is written by insurance companies and pharmaceutical corporations. Environmental policy is written by oil companies. This isn't democracy. This is plutocracy with a voting booth. And the public knows it. 75% of Americans think the economy is rigged in favor of the wealthy. They're not wrong. They can see it. They live it every day. But knowing you're being robbed doesn't mean you can stop it. Not when the robbers own the police. So what comes next? Where does this go? There are really only a few scenarios. Scenario 1: nothing changes. The extraction continues. The middle class keeps shrinking. Wealth keeps concentrating at the top. Social cohesion keeps deteriorating. This leads to a kind of neo-feudalism, a tiny aristocracy living in gated communities and private cities, a huge underclass barely surviving, no middle, no mobility, just a permanent hierarchy of wealth. Some countries already look like this. America is heading there fast. Scenario 2: reform. Somehow, against all odds, the political system responds to popular pressure. Taxes on the wealthy increase. Wages rise. Healthcare becomes universal. Education becomes affordable. Housing policy prioritizes people over investment returns. Union rights are restored. It's possible. Other countries have done it. But it requires political will that currently doesn't exist. It requires overcoming the enormous power of concentrated wealth. It requires people organizing, voting, fighting for change despite decades of being told there is no alternative. Scenario 3: collapse. The system breaks completely. Financial crisis, social unrest, political violence. Revolutions aren't clean. They're not noble. They're desperate populations that have run out of options. History is full of them. America isn't special. America isn't immune. Push people far enough and they push back. Usually not in ways anyone wants. The honest answer: probably some combination. Slow decline punctuated by moments of crisis and reform. Incremental change that never quite catches up to the damage. Enough reform to prevent collapse, but not enough to restore genuine, broadly shared prosperity. A managed decline into a less equal, less stable, less hopeful society. But here's what's true regardless of the scenario: this didn't have to happen. The disappearance of the American middle class is not an act of God. It's not inevitable. It's not the natural evolution of capitalism. It was designed. It was a series of choices made by people with power to benefit people with power. And that means it can be redesigned. Different choices can be made. It requires recognizing that an economy exists to serve human flourishing, not the other way around. It requires understanding that when workers prosper, everyone prospers. That inequality isn't just unfair, it's unstable and inefficient. That a strong middle class isn't a luxury or a relic. It's the foundation of everything we claim to value. Democracy, innovation, opportunity, social mobility. None of it survives without broad-based prosperity. The America of the 1950s and 60s wasn't perfect. It had racism, sexism, homophobia, environmental destruction. Those are not things to return to, but the economic architecture that created shared prosperity. That's worth learning from. That's worth fighting for, not because the past was better, but because we need to understand what worked before we can build something better. The American middle class isn't gone yet, but it's disappearing. And with it goes the dream that built this country, the idea that anyone, no matter where they start, can work hard and build a good life. That idea is dying, not because it was a lie, but because we stopped maintaining the systems that made it true. The question isn't whether you believe in the American dream. The question is whether you're willing to fight for the policies that make it possible. Not just for yourself, not just for your kids, but for the kind of society you want to live in. One where hard work is rewarded, where people can afford to live, where the future is something to look forward to instead of fear. That's the choice, not conservative versus liberal, not red versus blue, but extraction versus investment, oligarchy versus democracy, a society that works for everyone or a society that works for a few. The middle class is disappearing, but it doesn't have to. Not if enough people decide that the America we were promised is worth more than the America we're being sold. The clock is ticking, the choice is yours.